Ladies and gentlemen, we have a clip that we're going to play for you. And I'm going to have to give you some specific context. In fact, I do in the clip because I was there for it. And a lot of people, if you were just watching this at home or if you heard about it later, you might think, what's the big deal? I'm going to explain the big deal. And then we're going to go into talking about something else because there is a fight against woke right now. And there's a lot of factions in that fight, a lot of co-belligerents. And when we look at the right, we see these factions becoming more pronounced. And the thing that a lot of us are worried about is this idea, is the right just going to turn on itself before we have an opportunity to actually defeat what has caused the chaos that we see around us? By the same token, there has to be some standards for co-belligerents. There has to be some standards for what constitutes an ally in this fight against woke, because hopefully when we defeat woke, we're going to build something from that. And what we want to try to address right now is actually going to be a part of kicking off a series that we're doing called What Should the Right Want? But first, we got to discuss what are the different factions, and are we as different as being made out right now on social media, or is there actually a lot of areas that we can come together and work together? So we're going to try to discuss all of that. We're not going to take sides on the various factions within the right. We're just going to talk about what they are, what they represent. And then in November, you're going to see a series of interviews. And we talked from different people from these different factions to talk about their thoughts, their ideas, not in an adversarial way. I just wanted to know what they thought and why. So I hope you're going to enjoy that. But this episode is what's going to kick that off. But first and foremost, I am your host, Nick Freitas. With me in the studio, my beautiful bride, Tina, Queen of the Bees.
Hello, everyone.
Then we have our political prognosticator, our resident historian, and the Oracle of Virginia, Christian Hines.
Hey, how you doing?
I'm doing all right. All right. We're going to start in with this clip because I want you to see what just happened in the Virginia General Assembly.
All right, I'm going to need to explain the context of what you're about to see. So in the Virginia House of Delegates, where I currently serve, we have a process where you can honor someone that has died by requesting that when the House adjourn in the honor and memory of that individual. And we had a few the other day. I requested that we adjourn in the honor and memory of Charlie Kirk. One of my colleagues requested that we adjourn in the honor and memory of former Minnesota House Speaker Melissa Hortman, who was also tragically murdered. I want you to watch the difference in reactions. I would again move that today we adjourn in the honor and memory of Charlie Kirk. Well done, good and faithful servant.
The delegate from Culpeper, Delegate Freitas, moves that when the House adjourn today, do so in the honor and memory of Charlie Kirk. All those in favor, please rise.
Yeah, this is the Democrat side of the aisle, and you'll notice it's very empty as if they're not there, and then several of them just remain seated. Maybe they just didn't show up. Oh, no, there they are. There they are. They say, oh, there's Delegate Shin. She's actually going to come up here in a little bit later. Oh, look, there's Pastor Josh Cole and Delegate Amy Loffer. They're clearly got something to be at. Oh, Delegate Mike Jones. He's got to run out real quick to take a very important something. Oh, look, Delegate Shin's back.
Would move again that we, when we adjourn today, we adjourn in honor and memory of former Minnesota Speaker Melissa Hortman.
The delegate from Fairfax, Delegate Shin, moves that when the House adjourns today, do so in the honor and memory of former Speaker of the House, Melissa Hortman. All those in favor shall please rise.
Oh, notice how no Republicans are running for the door. Instead, we're standing there in solidarity and respect. Maybe it's because we don't find it difficult to stand in respectful solidarity against violence towards people that simply disagree with you on politics. Apparently, it's a bridge too far for some of our Democrat colleagues. I just want to say, once upon a time, I didn't care what they thought about me. Now, I hope that anybody that behaves or acts this way hates my guts. I think I'm doing a pretty good job.
And I do think I'm doing a good job because, quite frankly, one of my colleagues decided to lecture me in the House Delegates break room. She was very upset that her cousin had shared my post, my tweet, after Charlie Kirk's death. And she goes, you're such a hypocrite. You talk about civil dialogue, but you basically called for a war. No, I said we were in the midst of a war between diametrically opposed worldviews. Now, what's interesting is again, she thinks I'm a fascist, I'm a racist, I'm a sexist, I'm a bigot, I'm a horrible human being, a threat to democracy. And yet, no trouble walking right up to me and delivering what her opinion is of me, right? Because she's not really afraid because she knows she's full of crap. She also assumed that I care about the moral ramblings of somebody who believes it's perfectly legitimate to chemically and surgically mutilate gender-confused children in order to chop up babies in the womb. I do not. I do not care about her moral ramblings. I am, however, thrilled at two things. One, I'm thrilled that she can't stand me because anybody that behaves the way that she does is not someone that I would want to think well of me, right? So mission accomplished there. Second, I'm thrilled that her cousin is sharing my content. None of my family is sharing hers. So thanks for that. Tell your cousin hi for me. Anyway, the reason why I point this out, and the reason why this is important to mention before we talk about these various factions on the right, because you may be wondering, okay, what's the point of this? I want you to understand that what you just saw was not a bunch of, blue-haired, crazy George Soros paid protesters on a college campus setting trash cans on fire and yelling Free Palestine. That's the elected majority in the Virginia House of Delegates. Now you saw, you did see a few members on the Democrat side that had the common decency and courtesy to remain in their seats and to stand up and to, honor the memory of Charlie Kirk. And even if that's not what they attended, they were at least being respectful of the institution and the way that we conduct this process. When you saw the request to honor former Minnesota Speaker Melissa Hortman, you didn't see Republicans dashing around because, again, we respect the institution. And we respect, even though I don't agree with many of the things that Melissa Hortman did or wanted to do, it's still absolutely tragic that she was murdered. And I want to show a modicum of respect for her family that have undergone this tragedy. They don't feel the same compunction. Right? You had a lot of pastors and ordained ministers on the other side of the aisle. They got up and left. I only showed you a few. There were several more. They got up and left. You had some of the people in that house that are the biggest, they are the first to lecture you on tolerance and compassion, who sat there in their seats. Right? Didn't I guess even have the courtesy to try to flee the floor to try to make it look like they had to go to the bathroom or something? No, they wanted you to see that they refused to stand. The reason why it's important to understand this is because everybody that's telling you, well, it's just this crazy wing on social media, and social media brings out the worst. If you look in Virginia right now, Abigail Spanberger was considered one of the most moderate members of the Democratic Party in Virginia. And what is she doing? She goes all around the Commonwealth saying, let your rage fuel you. We've had three delegates now that have received so credible of death threats that the police actually had to go pick up and arrest somebody. One of them said, not only am I going to kill you, I know where your children are. You have Jay Jones texting. This is the guy running for Attorney General. The chief law enforcement officer of the Commonwealth of Virginia was, texting out about he hoped that a child would die in their mother's arms of one of his Republican colleagues so that he could know what it felt like and maybe change his mind on policy. And when he was called out on it, originally, he just doubled down. Okay, so you don't get to tell me that this is just some radical element in their mom's basement. It is not. This has become mainstream thinking within the Democratic Party. When you have a member of the Chesterfield School Board, which is one of our wealthiest counties in Virginia, in central Virginia, coming out and saying, I thought we used to celebrate when Nazis got shot. You need to understand, Charlie Kirk may be the stand-in for the rest of us, right? But that's what it is. Had it been me, had it been someone else, I have no doubt they would have remained seated or they would have run out of the building because we're bad people. Why would you celebrate? Why would you honor bad people? In fact, why wouldn't you celebrate the death of bad people? And once you start to understand that this is so ingrained, I find it comical that it was Speaker Don Scott that told me I was wrong. It was this other delegate that decided to chastise me. I was wrong when I said this is a war of diametrically opposed worldviews. I didn't say people, I said worldviews. And then you go right back on the floor and you see it demonstrated in real time. All the Republicans stood up in solidarity against political violence. And all the Democrats, or not all of them, most of them, either fled the room or remained seated. How am I wrong? I'm tired of being told I'm wrong. I would love to be shown that I'm wrong. But they always tell me I'm wrong while showing me I'm right. So I believe them now. And so should you. So should you. We don't have to like that this is the situation, but this is the situation. And the people that believe it are not just the crazies. The people that believe it are the ones that hold power within the Democratic Party. And if we don't come to grips with that, they're going to win. They're going to win. They're poised to win in Virginia right now, next Tuesday, unless we have enough people that we have the votes. It's a question of whether or not they'll show up. And right now, a lot of them haven't in Virginia. And so we'll see what happens. But this leads me to our second point and the main topic of our conversation today. There are, thankfully, a lot of entities that we would call co-belligerents against the woke. These are elements that have decided that woke is the problem. Woke is the enemy. They've been treating us like the enemy for decades. We just said, okay, fine, I guess we're your enemy. We don't get to choose whether or not they see us as an enemy. We only get to choose on whether or not we're going to respond in such a way that would allow us to defend ourselves. And so within that group, we're going to be talking about some broad categories, and then we're going to be talking about some outliers. We're talking about some organizations or some things that have jumped up recently that I don't think fall within one of the broader categories, but they're still there, and it needs to be addressed because it's being fought out among the right now on social media. So as we look at these various categories, I think we need to recognize that, again, we need to recognize what the threat is. We need to recognize that there are differences of opinion within the right or within the various co-belligerents that are fighting woke. And then eventually we're going to have a larger conversation on what are acceptable differences to us and the right, because we're not always going to agree on everything. And what are things that maybe fall outside of what should be acceptable to us or maybe anyone, right? So that'll be the nature of the conversation. Now, before I get to that, we need to thank today's sponsor because, gentlemen, I've said this all the time, marriage is a wonderful, wonderful thing. And your wife needs you to smell good. Let's face it, your wife, your girlfriend, the girl you want to marry, she needs you to smell good. Now, she may have an image in her mind of you throwing up weights at the gym or maybe doing yard work and loving that image of you out there. But I promise you, by the time you get home from the gym or by the time you get up to the porch from, clearing brush, she wants you to smell good. I have said this before. It's actually coming out in a book I'm releasing. If you want to be celibate in your marriage, smell bad, right? But if you can both be the man of her dreams and with an aroma that she finds enticing, then you need to go to Mando. You need to talk to Mando because Mando does a great job. They not only have odor control, they also have sweat control because, again, you don't want when you're wearing your nice shirt and whatnot, you want those big sweat stains. Mando takes care of all of it. You got the odor control, you got the sweat control. They're not loaded up with a lot of the crap you find in other things, right? Mando, I love using this. And again, this is another product that I was using long before they were ever advertising with us. So it's something that I actually believe in, right? Which is the criteria that we used before we actually advertise with somebody. So go check out Mando right now. In fact, if you go right now to shopmando.com, use my code Nick, you're going to get 20% off plus free shipping. You're telling me that's not worth a try, right? They had the guts to advertise with us. Go try them out. Smell good for your bride, your girlfriend. Smell good for them. Shopmando.com, use code Nick, 20% off, free shipping. All right, let's go ahead and talk about the kind of the various perspectives here on the right. So in this series, when I'm interviewing people, one of the things I talk about is I think we can kind of agree that there's kind of like three broad categories. And people can even be on a spectrum within these categories, right? But the first category that I usually talk about is this category of kind of the ex-liberal, the one that's, I didn't leave the left left me, right? You see Elon Musk talks about this. There's a popular novelist, Shriver. I think she talks about this. Peter Boghossian talks about this. These are a lot of people that for most of their lives, they would have been considered, if not liberals, left of center. And they're the ones where you show the chart where the left keeps getting farther and farther to the left. And so the middle keeps shifting to the left. And these are guys that they have identified. Like, I don't want to just say these are people that are just kind of, mildly upset. No, they are serious about helping us fight the left. James Lindsay was someone that, he used to be of the left. He was part of the New Atheists. He was part of the academia. And him, along with Peter Boghossian and others, who was the other professor that worked on the grievance studies?
Helen Pluckrose.
Helen Pluckrose. These are people that, again, they're not going to tell you, now I will say this: James Lindsay, I think, is more solidly in the conservative camp now. I think he would say that. But they were liberal. They saw what was happening on the left, and they either said, "Well, look, I can't go this far," but they just want to reset the clock to kind of like 2005. They're basically fine with kind of the march of progressivism all the way up to about, early 2000s. And then after that, they think it starts to get crazy, right? They don't want to trans the kids. They like freedom of speech. They believe that logic is not a tool of the patriarchy. It's actually a thing that we should use.
They were fine up until LBG. And then after that, not fine.
It got a little crazy for them, right? So again, I'm not trying to disparage them because again, I'm thrilled. Look, I don't think Elon Musk and I agree on everything socially or theologically. There's a lot we would disagree on that would be fairly significant. But can anyone here on the right not acknowledge that Elon Musk has probably done more than just about anybody on the right to actually give us a voice within the public space?
We would be in a very different world if he had not purchased Twitter and turned it into
That's
X.
right.
And the work that he did on Doge, I think he understood the real significant damage that was taking place with respect to our budgeting, with respect to government spending. Like I want to make this very, very clear. When I look at a lot of, kind of the tech bros and whatnot, I see a lot of people on the right trashing them as because they're not true believers and they just got here yesterday and what are they doing? Telling us how to run things. I get the concerns. But we're going to have to match the concerns a little bit with the gratitude, I think, of Elon Musk fundamentally changed the way that information is shared to where conservative voices are no longer just outright censored the moment that, the political elite on the left doesn't like what we have to say.
There's two perspectives on this one group. And I do think that it's not an either or.
Yeah.
And I also think that you do need both. Because one is, what we were just talking about, right? If Elon had not, left the left, right? If he had not purchased Twitter and turned it into X, I don't know what type of world we would be in.
Mm-hmm.
He has arguably done more of all these like ex-liberals. He has arguably done more to help push back against the left, to push back against progressivism than almost any of them.
Yeah.
And that also includes many conservatives that have been lifelong conservatives.
Yeah.
So, credit where credit is due. I will unite with anybody against evil.
Mm-hmm.
And so if somebody has come from the left and, they want to fight back against it, of course, I'm not going to excommunicate them from that.
Yeah.
But there's a second component that has to be recognized, which is actually the meme illustrates it.
Yeah. Let's go ahead and look at this meme.
So this meme was created by another one of these like kind of new atheist ex-liberals, Colin Wright. He made this meme a few years ago in 2021, and there's an updated version where there's a sniper rifle now on the left end. But he recently he has been complaining about the direction that he sees the right going. And he's like, well, you guys are going to lose without me. It's people like me are the reason why Republicans have even started to win again. And I countered to him and was like, look, buddy, you can't hold the right hostage and say, let me tell you what the right needs to be and how the right needs to be liberal like myself. If I haven't actually changed, right? If it's the left that left me, all that you're saying is you're still on the left. It's just that the left has become even crazier. Like, for example, notice how, I don't think Colin realizes this in his own meme. Notice how the center keeps moving further to the left with each passing year.
That's called the Overton window.
So the mere fact that somebody like Colin Wright, who is an atheist, pro-choice, pro-gay marriage, liberal academic, is now voting for a Republican is illustrative of where we are right now.
Yeah.
What you have right now is what they call the ratchet effect, where the left moves further to the left. They alienate and in some cases excommunicate members of their old coalition for a variety of reasons. They're not pure enough. They were on board with feminism, but not transgenderism. So therefore, we're gonna kick them out, J.K. Rowling style. Or they cross some sort of sacred red line for them. In the case of somebody like Eric Weinstein, for example, it was academic integrity and honesty within the university system.
Yeah, Elon, it was freedom of speech.
And Elon, it was freedom of speech. For some of these people, it was human biology, right? It was the differences between men and women.
This is like the gays against groomers. And
you know, for some people, like whatever the issue was, they crossed a red line for them. But they didn't change any of their positions, and they didn't recognize and own up to the fact that many of the positions, I won't say all of them, but many of the positions that they held and still hold today are what enabled the left to do what they're currently doing.
So I don't disagree with any of this. I also don't want to dig too deep into this just yet.
Okay.
I think that's an important designation, is that we need to understand that to the extent that I can look at someone like an Elon Musk and I can say, wow, this guy has been I've been fighting all my life for these things, and Elon Musk has had a bigger impact on those things than me. Now
he also has a lot more money than us.
Well, yeah, but I mean, that's my point,
Yeah.
right? Like someone can show up to the fight. Greatest evangelist in history outside of Jesus Christ, Paul. Before Paul was Paul, he was Saul of Tarsus, and he was going around murdering Christians, right? So it's important to understand that and appreciate what can happen when somebody sees the light. The biggest question for this group, though, is, do you honestly think you can just reset to 2005 and not end up back here 10, 15, 20 years later? Can you draw a straight line? You know, this is where I get into like James Lindsay, right? James Lindsay gets a lot of hate right now from certain sections on the right. And again, one of my goals with all of this was to basically try to say, hey guys, you know, maybe we all just calm down a bit.
Can I just say,
wait a second. Maybe we just calm down a bit and listen to each other and be, as Jordan Peterson says, be precise in our language before we just start going, nope, you're in this category, you're in that category.
I really appreciate that you've been able to like interview all these people. Like, for example, James Lindsay and Orrin McIntyre don't get along on X.
Not very well.
But you were able to interview both of them.
And I had a great conversation with both of them.
And
right?
we, talking about the right broadly, like we need people like that can do that.
Well, and this is my point on this category, right? I want to be appreciative of the point he's bringing up, that a lot of these people on the left have recognized what a threat wokeness is. When I look at someone, James Lindsay, I look at James Lindsay as someone that didn't just say, oh my gosh, this trans stuff is crazy, this woke stuff is crazy. He said, I want to understand the origins of this. And I can't emphasize enough how important that is. If you can't properly diagnose how you got to where you are, you will never be able to offer solutions that effectively address it. And so this is where I go into that. So that first category is what we might call, I didn't leave the left left me. And to Christian's point, they still hold on to a lot of ideologies which could be considered liberal progressive. But I think a good way to differentiate them between like a current leftist or a modern leftist is that they still have this underlying commitment to the ideas of free speech, freedom of inquiry, logic, the scientific method. You tell someone like Elon Musk, well, no, actually, Elon, the scientific method is an attribute of whiteness. He's going to look at you like you're an idiot, and rightfully so. So that's it. And here's what makes that distinction so important. If someone still has a basic commitment to truth, to logic, to reason, they can be convinced of things. You just have to make better arguments. You have to bring more data. It might be a longer process, but they've already been willing to recognize that, you know what, the group I was previously attached to has gotten it horribly wrong. That's a huge admission. That can be really difficult for people, especially when you used to be a celebrated member of that group and now they hate you. And so what I don't want to do is I don't want to tell, I didn't leave the left left me. I don't want to tell them you're not welcome here. I want to show proper appreciation for them being able to come to that intellectual conclusion. And I want to show appreciation for people that then took that intellectual conclusion and moved it into incredibly effective and impactful action. And a lot of these guys did. Right? You know, again, there's so much I don't agree with on Bari Weiss. I'm very glad of some of the things that she's said and some of the things that she's admitted. I'm very glad with the work that Peter Boghossian has done. I'm very glad with the work that Elon Musk has done. And so let's acknowledge where there might be some questions still. Let's also acknowledge when you say, I'm so glad that you've recognized something. You don't necessarily get to lead the movement now. It doesn't mean you don't get input. It doesn't mean you shouldn't be able to have your case. You should. But understand this is the part where that group needs to be respectful of the other groups that have been more traditionally on the right. And that's where we go into the second category here, which is what I might call the traditional conservatives. The traditional conservatives are the one that recognize the problem for a long time. I would have always placed myself, and again, none of us are placing ourselves in any camp right now. We're going to save that for a later episode. But I would have always placed myself in that camp, the traditional American conservative tradition. This is a big focus on classical liberalism, but it would be classical liberalism of what we would probably call the John Locke tradition, or maybe elements of the Montesquieu tradition, or the Scottish tradition, the Scottish elements of the Enlightenment, where you have Adam Smith and things like that relied very heavily on this concept of common sense, free markets, all of that. I completely reject the Jean-Jacques Rousseau version of the classical liberal tradition, or even what we might call more of the continental side of the Thomas Hobbes or things of that nature. And those guys are basically looking at the lieutenant leave, they're looking at the guys over to their left saying, hey guys, welcome. So glad you're here. It took you long enough. Like, we'd been warning you about this for how long? How long have we been warning you about this? And now, so glad you're here. You don't get to run the show. And these are the guys that they don't want to go back to 2005. I would argue that they recognize that this problem goes back much deeper. And I think a lot of them would point to probably three categories in American history with some caveats. So the traditional conservative looks at a lot of like the sexual revolution of the 60s, looks at a lot of the massive expansions of the federal government and the cultural shifts that took place in the 60s. They're not against the civil rights movement. Let's be honest about it. Like they're not upset with getting rid of Jim Crow, right? Many of them were advocates of getting rid of Jim Crow, but they did have some concerns with respect to the way what we might call Section 2 of the Civil Rights Act, where now
Voting Rights Act.
Voting Rights Act and stuff like that, where now all of a sudden you have this infrastructure, and now the lines aren't clear. They wanted equality before the law. They didn't want this massive federal bureaucracy trying to achieve equity by picking and choosing and doing things like that. That's one category. So they're very, very much against the sexual revolution of the 60s and some of what they see as leading toward this idea of reverse racism and things of that nature. They're also skeptical. Some of the more guys that really delve into the history of how our country got to this point, very skeptical of FDR and the New Deal, very skeptical of Woodrow Wilson, the Federal Reserve. They look at the whole progressive era. So they they break it up in three chunks. They say, if you look at things that happened in the teens under the Wilson administration, things that happened under the FDR administration with the New Deal, and things that happened under the Johnson administration, traditional conservatives look at those things as this is the beginning of the problem and where we're at now. They will point to things like the last time we had a president that left the federal government smaller than when he found it was Calvin Coolidge, right? They will point to the Federal Reserve. They will point to bad monetary policy. They will point to the corporatist and fascist elements of the New Deal and say, this is a problem. The federal government was never supposed to be this big. They will point to the Great Society and the massive expansion of the welfare state. And they will say, this is where we went wrong. This is where we went wrong. But they will also acknowledge the positive things that happen there. The positive things that they will acknowledge through that is the idea that, yes, we got a lot better to equality. We got a lot closer to equality before the law, right? These are things that they do not reject at all. These are things that they cherish. Does anybody disagree with that kind of classical version of because we're going to get into the third category on where they think it went wrong, which is different than where the traditional American conservative movement thinks it went wrong.
Yeah, I mean, I certainly think that that's what traditional conservatives think about themselves, and I would agree with probably at least half of that framing. There's definitely elements that I'll disagree with that we'll get to later. But
yeah.
I mean, they really for a long time have formed the core of what we call the right, certainly in America.
Yeah.
Arguably in other Anglo countries, I would say that there's similarities, not exact, but there's similarities with what we would call the right in Canada and the UK as well. Maybe not as much the European continent. They're kind of going through an identity crisis on the right there. But in the American tradition, this traditional conservative approach has traditionally been the core of what we call the right.
Well, and it's also something that there's a strong libertarian element there, not big L libertarian, but
No, I agree.
But what I mean by that on the small L libertarian is that if you look at the entire American tradition, it was all about how do we limit government power, and how do we do that through federalism? How do we do that through various powers competing with one another? How do we do that by allowing for representation, but also putting very, very strict guidelines on what the government's supposed to be doing? And if you look at all of that was rooted in a couple of things. One was this idea of localism. It was the idea that we can't have a strong central authority trying to govern over a very, very wide and dispersed population that has different geographical concerns and cultures and et cetera. A lot of it was based off of this idea of very, very strong appreciation for property rights, for what became later free market economics, this idea that I should be able to engage freely in economic transactions with other people, and that I should be able to keep what I earn. Property rights was a huge element of that, freedom of speech, freedom of religion. All of these things have what you might call small L libertarian traditions. Now, again, when you go back to the founding, you have to understand that those small L libertarian traditions was taking place in a world that was overwhelmingly shaped by Christian theology, morality, and things of that nature. So there were limitations to it, right? You would not have found a bunch of founders walking around celebrating prostitution or cocaine. A lot of libertarians will point out, well, a lot of those things were legal at that time. You're not going to find any of the founders going, yeah, that's why we did this, is because we really wanted maximization of individual liberty with no social restraints. You're not going to find that argument. And so again, that formed kind of the basis. And so the reason why that sort of thought looks at Woodrow Wilson, FDR, and Johnson as being the primary source of the problem where the country went wrong initially was because that was the rejection of limited government, individual liberty, freedom, and the introduction of the administrative state under Wilson, the idea of rule by experts, the massive intervention of the federal government into managing the economy and social welfare programs, starting with FDR and then going into absolute overdrive during the Johnson administration. So I would argue that a lot of the traditional liberal critiques are accurate. The question is, do they make the same mistake that they're accusing of the first group, right? The traditional conservative argument for the first group is, you guys only trace the problem back to 2005. This third group says, yes, and you guys only trace the problem back to Woodrow Wilson when you should trace it back to the Enlightenment. And that third group, which sometimes I think gets inappropriately categorized as woke right. You could argue that there's certain, like when we talk about woke right, that's generally this idea that you're using the same tactics of the left in order to come to different conclusions. But there's this whole category within this third group that they're not woke at all. There's nothing about them that is woke. The tactics they use aren't woke. But what they are is someone that says, I don't know if the Enlightenment was right about certain things that they assumed about human beings. They'll even concede, they'll say, look, the Enlightenment might have been right about Anglo-Saxon traditions. It might have been right about certain European traditions. But the idea that these were just universal principles that you can apply anywhere and will work just perfectly, or that you can import a bunch of people into our and they will just suddenly see the light and adopt those principles, they don't accept that. They don't accept this idea of universal suffrage necessarily. They certainly don't accept the idea of just the idea that we are independent economic units that can go from culture to culture and everything's fine. They're very, very harsh against any notions of cultural relativism. Some of them have gone so far as to question elements of representative government, right? They will say that, no, universal suffrage is a problem. Universal suffrage is kind of what helped get us there. Some of them are questioning things like, do we need to consider monarchy again? And I will point out, the first person to suggest something very similar, to offer that up as a very, very serious consideration for our own republic, was Alexander Hamilton.
The bad Hamilton.
The bad Hamilton.
The one
he
in
wanted,
like Central
he
Bacon.
wanted a universe. He wanted a
Well,
lifelong
we've sunk
presidency.
my argument right there. The audience is going to reject it.
But I want to let Christian, because Christian has done a lot of research into this category, right? So it is my brief explanation a fair one.
Well, can I just chime in real quick? In all of these categories, what we're not really addressing, but that do exist, are all of the people that are willing to wear the label but don't really know what it means. And they just kind of like what they like and don't like what they don't like. And they will say they are that thing. Let's say they say they're conservative, but then they're totally cool with farm subsidies. Like they're conservative with finances until you touch their farm subsidies or until you talk about Social Security or, any of those things. And so there is an element within all of these persuasions that just kind of like what they like and don't like what they don't like. But they mostly fit into this shaped hole. Well, so we're not really addressing those people because those people will do whatever feels good to them.
Well, they're very a lot of times they get into positions of power because once they have that power, they can reward friends and punish enemies. And
let's be real, that category of people actually outnumbers all the others.
But here's the thing. Okay, but for the purpose of the conversation, right? We have to establish where are these groups, because you're right that very, very few people perfectly fit into like this. Like this description is all they are and all they will ever be. No, what ends up happening is people generally fit into a category, and then there's a spectrum within the category.
Yeah, like you're never going to find perfectly pure people within these categories.
Yeah.
You're just not. And I mean, we've had plenty of people that'll go, oh, I like so-and-so. They're a true conservative. But then I would know that you just don't know their voting record, because I know they offered, free tuition to illegal aliens. Does that fit this? And then I'll bring something like that up and they'll go, no way, not her.
Yeah.
Yes. Let me show you in black and white where she did that. It's all documented.
This is the problem with the term conservative.
Right.
It's relative to the time period. What are you conserving?
Well,
Whose order are you
right.
conserving?
Yeah, that's true. That's true.
And again, look, there is 1,000 rabbit holes that we could get into right now that I really want to avoid, because we gotta. I think it's fine to point.
I was only pointing out that there is a swath of people that don't really fit into these categories.
So, but again, in these camps, so we talked about the first one, we talked about the second one, now we're talking about the third one. And again, the general description for that third one is, if the traditional American conservative thinks the problem started with Woodrow Wilson, got worse with FDR, and then horrible with Johnson, this third category is like, no, you screwed up with the Enlightenment, Haas.
When we were building the outline for this episode, I listed it as the new right, and then I put in parentheses, I'm like, maybe it's the old right. For example, the term left and right, not a lot of people know this, at least not a lot of Americans. The term left and right comes from the French Revolution. If you supported the king, this is before they chopped his head off, obviously.
Yeah.
If you supported the king, you sat on the right side of the benches of the National Assembly.
Yeah.
And if you wanted a republic, right? If you were part of the Mountain or the Jacobin Club, you sat on the left side of the benches. And we have inherited that term ever since. And so this third group, when I say it's like the new right, what we mean is that, you have these like new people that are coming along, putting out ideas that in some ways seem like it's challenging traditional conservatism. There's a variety of people on this topic that have been writing about or talking about it for the last 10, 15 years. Curtis Yarvin's an example. Nick Land's an example. I mean, you interviewed Aaron McIntyre, who's kind of in that camp, maybe not entirely, but
yeah, he tells us on an interview, so you'll see.
So, but the thing is that if you actually look at where they're being influenced by people that predate the French Revolution, and that are critiquing the Enlightenment project. Yeah, like for example, Joseph de Maistre was a vehement opponent of the French Revolution. Yeah. And so he would have rejected the term left and right altogether. He would be like, no, this is a creation. This is a product of the French Revolution. We need to be getting past that and repealing all of that. And so when you're operating on this idea of I'm a conservative, well, what are you conserving? Well, liberalism from the 1960s. Okay, but that's to the left of even the founding fathers. Like, here's an analogy. I was telling Nick this before we started filming. Yeah. And it's something that I really want Nick to listen to if he gets a chance. So there was this interview that was done, not interview, it was like a debate that was done on a smaller YouTube channel. And I won't name drop the names because maybe one day we'll do something deeper on this. But one guy was a, left-wing progressive, right? Saying, Charlie Kirk was a fascist and all this stuff. And then the other guy was a, definitely a traditionalist Catholic, maybe a reactionary, but he actually used to be on the left and he became a conservative. And then he concluded that conservatism is simply conserving liberalism.
Yeah.
And so then he moved even further to the right. And the gentleman on the right, his biggest argument is that what you call fascism is simply an equivocation. You are redefining the term to not mean 1930, mid-century Germans, mid-century Italians. When in our mind, we all know what people mean when they say fascist. We think Mussolini, Hitler, that type of stuff.
Yeah.
And he's saying, no, you're not saying that because obviously Charlie Kirk is not goose-stepping with Mussolini and Hitler. You are redefining the term fascist to simply mean anything that predates World War II. Or at the very least, anything that predates 1900. And so if Charlie Kirk espouses any view of social relations, of how you should act and behave and live in the world, let alone how you should politically organize anything in the world that predates the 20th century, that's now called fascist. Is John Adams a fascist?
Yeah.
And, they got into a back and forth. He was like, no, he's not a fascist. He believed in democracy. He believed in the... And handing over power. He lost the election in 1800 and let Jefferson in. And so then the response from the reactionary is like, oh, okay, so anytime that anybody refuses to hand over power or engages in a change in government that's not democratic, that's fascist. So John Adams is still a fascist because he participated in ratifying the Constitution, which in a way was a coup against the Articles of Confederation. And then he's like, oh, but that was democratically ratified by the states. There was no coercion. Now, what I wish that he had brought up, and he didn't just because it was a 2-hour-long interview, but what he should have brought up is that Rhode Island was compelled to ratify the Constitution. They were strong. They stood out. They were the last state to refuse to do it, and they were strong-armed into doing it against their will. And because every other state had done it, and they were like, we're gonna close the border, tariff you, all these things if you don't sign this thing.
Yeah.
And point is that that's one example. Another more prominent example is I guarantee you that Charlie Kirk has more liberal views on who should be eligible to vote than John Adams did.
Yeah. Yeah, most likely.
And so the critique that you're getting from what some people are calling the new right, and in many respects is actually the old right, is that no, conservatism is conserving liberalism. And most people who identify as conservatives aren't even conserving classical liberalism. They're conserving post-60s liberalism. They're just accepting the progressive narrative that the most evil thing in the world is racism and bigotry and sexism and all the other isms in the world, and that we need to eradicate those and we need to use state power to eradicate those things. And so they've just totally accepted everything that's come out of the 60s, the civil rights movement, feminism, the everything out of Woodstock, all of that stuff, right? They've just accepted all of it. And they're simply trying to conserve all of that. And even the most conservative of conservatives are not to the right of somebody like John Adams, who would say, if you were to plop John Adams here in front of us and you asked him who should be eligible to vote, he would almost certainly say white, landowning.
He was an abolitionist. So
he wasn't. I'm not saying that he was that he was in favor of slavery. He was an abolitionist, but nonetheless, he would have said.
He would probably said educated.
He would have said
landowners.
educated landowning men.
Yes,
are the ones who should be able to.
He might have included women to some degree because his wife.
No, he
Abigail was a big.
And she was very, very brilliant, and
yes.
she definitely played a role in influencing her husband. He confided with her. I mean, there's all sorts of letters about him, seeking advice from her. But Adams probably would have said, men and women are created for different purposes. And I'm not saying that women can't play a role in politics, especially through their husbands and through their families, but it is men's responsibility to engage in the day-to-day running of a state, and it is women's responsibility to run the home. And that those are different responsibilities. It's not that women have no political say, it's that their political say is different than how men engage in it. In the same way that They both have a say in raising children, and that manifests in different ways. That's probably very similar to the type of argument that he would have made.
Well,
and that today is now called fascist.
Yeah.
Right?
I think we can all agree that the categories that the left use to describe anybody that doesn't agree with them are kind of useless at this point. All it is a political tool for manipulation. It's not meant to be an accurate representation of what these terms have meant. It's meant to be a manipulation of those terms to achieve an outcome. But when you look at the way when we talk about American conservatism, it's typically associated with when you say that their critique is all you're trying to do is conserve liberalism, that can be taken in two ways. One way is to say that you're just conserving whatever happened 20 years ago, right? Like that's all you want. Like it's this constant, each generation is increasingly going to the left, and the conservatives in one generation just want to go back one generation.
And that's a totally fair critique.
And it is a fair, absolutely fair critique of many people that use the label conservative. Your more hardcore conservatives are going, no, I'm trying to conserve the traditions founded within the Declaration of Independence, the Federalist Papers, the Anti-Federalist Papers, the Constitution. And for them, within that tradition includes emancipation, right? Like they're saying that no, the Declaration of Independence said, we hold these truths to be self-evident that all men are created equal. So therefore, emancipation is a logical and appropriate outworking of those core principles. But that's what we're trying to preserve. This third category says not far enough, because essentially what you're doing is you're still accepting classically liberal interpretations of reality. And what they're saying is you can no longer just offer those up as a presupposition that we accept. We're starting to think maybe there was something to these other power structures, whether they be politically oriented. So for instance, you brought up the Holy Roman Empire, right? That was not like a sole monarch that like ruthlessly ruled over everything. What you had was a patchwork of various principalities or kingdoms, I guess, on some level.
There were some kingdoms.
But primarily principalities, kingdoms, or other dukedoms or whatnot.
Bishoprics, too. There was church lands.
And so what you had is you had something of a confederation of these various political entities that had a sovereign in the form of the Holy Roman Emperor. And then you also had kind of that divide between the ecclesiastic and the civic.
And he was elected by prince electors.
Yes.
Right.
And so there's various things where when they say that, again, to the traditional American, you're like, oh my gosh, that's heresy, because you're suggesting royalty or titles of nobility, or you're suggesting centralization of power. And haven't we rejected all of these things? And what that third category says is not necessarily in its entirety. And what that third category, I would say, also says is we're also not willing to accept certain interpretations of separation of church and state. We're not willing to accept these modern interpretations of, I think some of them would even go so far as to say class. Or at the very least, they would say we're not willing to accept these modern interpretations of the roles of men and women are essentially interchangeable. They would be very hard on, like, no, I don't accept that. I think we need to go back to more of a traditional view of the roles between men and women. And I think they would definitely go back to, we also need to respect that this whole Francis Fukuyama, the end of history, we've all agreed classical liberal. Like, no, we agreed. Carl Benjamin said that no, what classical liberalism is Sharia law for Anglo-Saxons, right? Or for the British. It's something that makes sense to us because it's a part of our historical tradition. But if I'm looking at other places around the country, it's ridiculous to assume that I can import somebody from a very, very different cultural tradition and that we'll just all work together because classical liberalism.
Can I just point something out? I think one of the reasons this third category has sprung up is because to conserve something presupposes that that thing exists. You can't conserve something that no longer exists, that has gone extinct, that has been axed. And so when forces outside of the conservatives' control basically completely eliminate whatever it was they used to be conserving, they have to move to something new to conserve, which tends to be whatever the liberals have come up with. And so now they're conserving that tradition because you can't conserve that which does not exist. So the third category of people want to bring back things that have previously gone extinct. And so instead of constantly trying to preserve ground, they want to take back ground. And I think that is the thing that really separates these two, is one is conserving and constantly allowing itself to become extinct because it can't fight for that which does not exist. They're only fighting for that which already exists. And so when they lose that battle, perfect example, okay, gay marriage. Perfect example is fight. Marriages between one man and one woman. And there was always the slippery slope analogy. You're going to have polygamy next. You're going to have all these things next. And then boom, what happens? We lose that fight. Everyone abandons that fight because there's nothing to conserve there anymore. We lost. And so now we're just trying to conserve. Well, now we can't let polygamy happen. Oh, now we can't let pedophilia happen.
Transgenderism.
And so they're now conservatives are conserving gay marriage.
So when
Yeah.
And so
nailed it, Tina.
The idea is that this third group is like, no, it's not enough that we say this is how far and no further, because the line just keeps moving. We want to take back ground. We want to re-implement those things which were good for society that have now been completely murdered by the left. We want to resurrect those.
I think that's a really good point.
That's exactly
because I think you're spot on. I think what is the perception, and we can debate on whether it's an accurate one. By accurate, I mean if it has to be that way. Because theoretically, you could have a world where traditional conservatives fight very, very hard to get back things that they lost. But if they haven't done a great job of it. They've been losing.
No, and they're apologizing all over themselves
Yeah.
for saying anything mean about the gays.
Yeah, and so the right is or this third category, because I don't think that third category is well defined by what they want in the end. But I do think you're absolutely spot on that it is very well defined that they are aggressive, whereas that second category is constantly associated with defense.
Yes.
And that's the part where that third category looks at the second category. And there's almost this rejection of the classical liberal tradition or the traditional American conservative because, well, as you've pointed out before, if your strategy worked, why are we here? And if what you're going to tell me is what we just need more, well, we just need a renewed commitment to traditional conservatism and the American tradition. Okay. And how does that not get us back to right? Like if we win, how does that not get us right back to where we were before? You know, you gave him the seat at the table, you let him take all the seats, and now you're just sitting here. What you want to die on principle? I think that's a very good point, Tina. I think that if I had to find a way, and I haven't thought of it this way until you said that. If I had to think of a way to describe that third category, like the animating feature of it is, we're not interested in defense. We're interested in offensive action to take back the things that we care about. And to ensure that this crap never happens again. And I think that's the appeal.
Mm-hmm.
That's why
because there were some things that got crucified.
Yeah.
There were some things that got axed that should never have been axed. Things that were good for society. Yeah. There were lines. There were boundaries within society that should never have been ripped up.
Yeah.
You know, some of these fence posts should never have been ripped up.
Chesterton's fence has been torn out of the ground multiple times now. And it turns out that many of those fence posts were actually essential to propping up civilization. And we're suffering because the foundations have been knocked out from underneath it, and it's just slowly imploding.
Yeah.
And I mean, this group is probably the most popular with young men in terms of who makes it up. Yeah. I'm not saying that young men are overwhelmingly in this group, right? I'm saying that in this group, it's mostly younger, believe it or not. And it's largely, you know, in many respects, I think it's largely ex-conservatives. In the same way that you had ex-liberals that were like, I didn't leave the left left me, and then they became, you know, they kind of shifted to the right, even though they actually didn't really change a lot of their views, maybe one or two of them. Well, I mean, like, something kind of similar happened to me, right? Like I
Mm-hmm.
was a libertarian for so long. And then I was like, why is libertarianism not working? Why does nobody ever
Yeah.
buy into libertarianism other than libertarians? And eventually I just concluded that like, oh no, progressivism has like its own agenda. And anytime that libertarians ally with progressives, it's not for the sake of liberty, it's for the sake of leftism.
Yeah.
Right? Like in so many respects, when we say things like, oh, this time-honored institution, we need to tear it down in the name of liberty. Well, we tear it down and it creates a vacuum. And what fills the vacuum? A new set of progressive social norms. Here's a good example. I remember when the debate over gay marriage was happening, and there were libertarians like myself who were saying, get the government out of it. I remember politicians saying, get the government out of it. I think most of us were on get the government out of it.
Yeah.
And what happened? Did we get the government out of marriage?
No.
Nope.
No, we repealed traditional marriage. And what did we get? We got state mandated gay marriage.
And
By
now,
mandated, we mean
Yeah.
that recognized,
Has
right?
to be
and
recognized.
now in
we
some
had-
of these places, they are going to try to compel religious organizations to do so.
Yeah.
And not only did we have state mandated recognition of gay marriage, right? We also eventually got state sanctioned transgenderism. And then we got the state will steal your child away from you and mutilate them in certain states as long as they claim to be transgenderism. And all that happened within 1 decade.
So I think this is the other animating feature of this third category. One is the aggression. We're taking land back. We're not. The second part is this whole idea is if what you did worked, it would have worked. And since it didn't, then we need to do something different. And so that's the part where, and a big part of if what you believed worked, it would have, is the idea that your position was get the government out of it. And what they're saying is the government refuses to stay out of it. So it's almost like that third category is rejecting kind of that libertarian tradition. Now, I think it would be unfair. I think it would be an unfair characterization to say that they want authoritarian government just in a different direction. I think it's more fair to say that when it comes to maybe some of the most important components of what makes civilization work, their argument is we tried to get government out of it. All it did was create a vacuum. So if government is going to be involved, then I want it to be a government which shares my values.
Right. And that's why it is very appealing. That's why MAGA is incredibly appealing to this group, because it really make America great again. It's reestablishing things that were lost. Okay. So, but really what ends up having to get parsed out in that environment is what equals great. What is it?
Yeah.
What are the things we want to bring back that were great? Because there were things that were not,
Were not
great.
great.
That's where the real debate is.
Right.
I see
Yes.
coming up on the right is what is it that we're fighting for,
Yeah.
and what does that vision look like? Because that neo-reactionary wing are still themselves, like you see this on the internet all the time. Like these ideas are circulating. I follow a lot of these people on Twitter, and you know, I watch a lot of this content on YouTube and stuff like that. You know, I read a lot of their Substack articles, and you see the ideas churning of like, what is the good life?
Yeah.
What is virtuous? How should civilization be oriented? And there's this, you know, debate kind of going on under the surface. You don't see it with politicians, but with intellectuals on the right, there's this real debate of what is it that we're fighting for? They're trying to
Right,
figure this
because
out
somewhere
right now.
along the way we lost the plot.
Yeah.
And then everybody latches on to a different aspect somewhere, and they're trying to find cohesion here. Like where should, like, there has to be an ultimate truth, something that's right. What is that thing, and can we bring everybody to it?
I think the other reason too why the right is in a bit of turmoil right now is, and I think the more you think about these three categories, the more it makes sense that there would be turmoil. Because again, when you have people that think we can just reset the button to 2005, the vast majority of the right is like, are you nuts? Like, do you have no idea what got us here? And then when you look at the people that like, well, we just need to fight for the, you know, those good old fashioned American values, you've got one category going, well, we don't like a lot of those values. And then you've got another category going, if it was good enough to do that, how come you guys haven't won anything for the past 70 years when it comes to the shifting to the Overton window? Like you may have had like some temporary delays with respect to like the Reagan years or whatnot, but you haven't been able to bring back the things that you actually care about and think are valuable.
Mm-hmm.
And then you have that third category, which the other two categories are looking at going, okay, there's some of the things you're saying I understand, but there's other things that you're saying that this is such a radical departure from anything we've ever kind of looked at as mainstream thought that you sound crazy.
Yeah, but like
Right?
the third category is the one that is offering something to fight for.
Okay, this is the part where I want to push back a little bit. I would disagree with that.
No,
And the only reason I say this,
they are offering something to fight towards, whereas the others are not really doing that.
okay, here's what I would push back on that assessment of the third category. I know what the first category wants. I know what the second category wants. What the third category wants, first of all, it's the broadest. And it varies from, I want to go back to a strict interpretation of the Constitution at the time of writing, to reanalyzing whether or not Stalin had some good points to make. That's the part where that third category gets a little bit scary, because I am seeing lines of reasoning, and I am seeing it's that aversion problem that we talked about. There are people in category 3 that I greatly respect, who are basically saying, look, we were told a particular narrative all of our life, and it's time to question elements of that narrative. It's time to use our reason, to use logic, to use our faith, to question that narrative, to include some stuff that was pretty well ingrained. And you know what? I think they're asking really good questions. I totally respect the way Orrin McIntyre or Carl Benjamin is addressing some of these things. Whether or not I agree with every conclusion is up for debate, but I don't think they're being unreasonable in the questions that they're asking or the way that they're asking them. There are other people who are saying we need to question everything, who are now coming back going, well, maybe Hitler was the good guy in World War II.
Oh, like Nick Fuentes.
Look, the point that I'm going to say here is we've said this before, perfectly appropriate to say, you've lied to me about so many things, I don't trust you anymore.
Yeah.
It is something different entirely to say, you've lied to me about so many things, the opposite of what you say is true. Because the opposite of what some of these people are saying is every bit as evil as what they're trying to do, because it's just a mirror image of itself. It's just evil in a different direction. And that's the part that I'm concerned about. That's the part where when we say, for instance, when Matt Walsh said, look, I've got some disagreements with people on the right, but the enemy in front of us is woke.
Yeah.
I don't think Matt was saying, I want to ally with neo-Nazis to defeat the woke.
But he got a ton of pushback.
I know he did. And I'm trying to correct for this right now.
Okay.
Because I think Matt was unfairly treated. Now maybe I'm wrong on this, but I don't think so. I don't think Matt was saying, oh, we should reevaluate Hitler. Matt was not saying that. Matt was saying that when James Lindsay, Carl Benjamin, Orrin McIntyre, Konstantin Christen, when we're spending more time fighting Joel Berry, Seth Dillon, when we're spending more time fighting each other over some of the nuances on what constitutes woke right or what constitutes, he goes, we are missing the bigger fight right now. And so, look, I'm not saying we agree on everything, but need to have a bit of a ceasefire among those people. I don't think he's saying, whatever neo-Nazi comes about, I'm willing to fight you as long as you're willing to fight woke. I don't think that's what Matt was ever implying. And I'm a little bit frustrated that people piled on to Matt as if we don't have a long history of Matt talking about things and putting what he said within the context of what Matt believes. That's one. By the same token, there are other people that, let me just make myself very clear. I'm under no illusions about what woke is. I'm under no illusions about what its animating features are, critical theory, atheism. I'm under nobody gets to tell me I don't understand the nature of that threat, because I've spent a lot of my life trying to fight it very, very specifically and to understand it so I can fight it more effectively. But everybody that opposes that is not my freaking ally. All right? If your solution to defending woke is Stalin or Hitler, we are not the same. We are not the same. You just want a different brand of atheistic or pagan authoritarianism.
Mm-hmm.
That's it. And no, we are not allies.
I wouldn't even say authoritarianism. I would say totalitarianism.
Totalitarianism. Yeah,
totalitarianism is what happens when you secularize politics.
Yes. So, well, and among other things, but yes. So I think that there's a fourth category out there that
co-belligerents.
They may be co-belligerents suggests that we're like somehow teamed up some way in a way that we're not.
No. When I say co-belligerent, what I mean is anything in the world that's not on the left. And that is to give you an idea of how broad that is.
Yeah.
And to illustrate like how co-belligerents are not allies.
Yeah.
At all. In fact, many cases, co-belligerents can be a different type of enemy.
Yeah.
Is that in a very literal sense, if you think about who's not woke, the CCP is not woke.
No.
North Korea is not woke.
North Korea is not
the
woke.
Taliban are not
Yeah,
woke.
just because
right?
something's
Like,
not woke doesn't mean it's our ally.
But that does not mean that if I had, like, I would not want to live in North Korea and I would not want to live in rural Afghanistan or even in Kabul, right? Like, and I wouldn't want to live under Xi Jinping's China. I might not be able to fully articulate, because I'm in the process of trying to sort through a lot of these questions that other people are as well. I have at least a loose framework of what type of world, what type of society, I shouldn't say world, what type of society, civilization I want to live in.
Yeah.
And it does not look like North Korea or Afghanistan or China or the Soviet Union or Nazi Germany. It looks more like the type of America that used to exist. I'm nothing more than an American. I don't belong anywhere else in this in the world. Like, if you tested my DNA, it would come back as German, English, Italian. But I've been to Italy. It's a beautiful country. I loved it. I was there earlier this year.
What
It's
you're
not
saying
home.
right now brings up a good question that Caleb has. He said, since conservative has become so diluted and broad, is it necessary to adopt a label like traditionalist or something like that?
That's what Carl Benjamin calls himself. He calls himself an English traditionalist, and he jokingly says, "I'm as far to the right as you can possibly go on the political spectrum." And of course,
so you're a trad con.
But the thing is that I'm not going to LARP and pretend that I'm something that I'm not. Like, I don't go to a Latin mass. I don't dress up in it. These are things that other traditionalists critique, is that, like, look at the way that we dress or the way that we talk. I listened to some interviews recently, a few weeks ago, of survivors of the Titanic. This was like in the 50s. And the way that they speak is different than the way that people speak today. And I listen to it and I'm like, we've lost something.
Yeah.
And just our mannerisms and the way that we communicate with each other and the way that we dress and the way, like, you go to a store today and people are wearing pajamas.
Yep.
Like, and think about, have you ever seen like video, footage of like 100 years, like 1900,
where they're walking down the street and everyone is dressed to the
120-year-old
nines.
footage, and everybody's dressed in full suits or full dresses. And
there's this one channel where this woman, she dresses kind of like in a very classic, it's not a perfect like 1930s or 1940s apparel, but it's definitely kind of that feel.
Right.
Kind of a modernized, updated version of that. And people are just like, because
she'll walk through and just all eyes are on her because it's so different.
Classy and elegant and they're
super sharp.
Look at me. I'm being a hypocrite right now. I'm talking, and I gotta admit it, because, like, I'm talking about, we need to bring back traditionalism. We need to start questioning these things that we just took for granted, like the Enlightenment and everything that's come out of it. We need to revolt against modernity. And yet here I am as a product of modernity.
Well, because there's an element of aesthetic that people are after in this as well. You've got that with the trad wife aesthetic, going on, where it's like, I want to fit this like persona from the 40s or what. And I don't mean like what this other, that was more like a social experiment.
Yeah.
But like some of these people, they're making all this content of them kneading the dough and doing all the stuff, and they're all wearing these cute little dresses with these cute little aprons. And I got to admit, there is something very appealing about the aesthetic, but there is a big difference between something being an aesthetic and sort of cosplaying versus really truly implementing it. But I would submit to you that I think there is, if you're going to start implementing some kind of a change like that, you're going to feel like you're cosplaying at first.
Yeah.
But if you make it a part of your life and it becomes part of who you are and the way you present yourself, this is just who you are at that point. But there's a beginning when you start doing something like that it could feel like, I feel like a poser.
Yeah.
But you want to implement this, so you're going to adopt that now.
But you see how this is so much deeper than just electoral politics.
Right.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes.
We're talking way deep. We're getting to
it's in the
manners
arts,
of
it's in
dress.
fashion, it's in
Well, and
entertainment, it's the way we talk.
I think this is important because culture is so much more than who I vote for or the legal structure. Culture is mannerisms and language and literature and dress and food and traditions around breaking bread together and all these things. And I think there's been a multicultural aspect. Like a positive element of a multicultural aspect is one where you can actually take good things from different things and integrate them in a way that makes sense, right? And enriches instead of tears down. The negative aspect is when you get this, amalgamation of just garbage that has no coherence whatsoever. And you end up with a complete lack of any formality. And I'm a pretty informal guy on the whole, right? I think that's kind of an American thing too, to some degree, is to not, because we never had much of an aristocratic tradition. There aren't the same kind of social norms. And look, one of the things you'll see in the UK is they have a snobbery problem. They have a class problem. Whereas if you speak with a certain accent, it's like you're kind of immediately dismissed. And you hear people in the UK talk about this a lot. So again, I don't want to go so far in the other direction where we say this, but I think there's something to it. I think there's something to of when you dress a certain way, when you behave a certain way, when you act a certain way, at first it feels like LARPing, but over time your behaviors change in order to fit what you're trying to be like. And I don't think there's anything wrong with that when it's done in a positive aspect. But I want to wrap this up because this episode really is about kicking off this larger series of discussions that we're going to have. I'm going to be traveling a lot in November. I'm going to be at, I'm going to be with Yaf in Texas. I'm going to be with Ali Beth Stuckey. I'm going to be with Trigonometry and Constantine Christen. I'm going to be in Francis. I'm going to be with Yaf at University of Iowa. Yaf with Cal Berkeley doing a Q&A there. We're going to be at a men's Bible retreat up in Rhode Island. We just got a ton of stuff. We're going to be doing Convocation with Chad Wright at Liberty University. So a lot of traveling in November, but we wanted to make sure that we left you guys with something that would be an interesting discussion. So this is the kickoff. We have our three general categories. We have the I didn't leave the left left me. Thank you guys for joining the fight against wokeism. We'll see what happens. We have more of your traditional conservatives that are trying to figure out what went wrong and can they get back some of the things that they wanted? Because if they can, when are you going to start? There's been too much defense within that second category. You have the third category, which is all about, hey, let's go on offense. Let's take back some of these things that we think are essential for civilization. But you're going to have to kind of figure out what it is you ultimately want, because there's a lot of different suggestions going on there. Some of them I think make sense. Others I think are bat crap crazy. Right?
Yeah.
And so it's about figuring out what falls into that third category so that they can present something. But I think the more we have a conversation among people that fit in these various categories, maybe we can find something that we can agree on that preserves the best of what we think it means to be an American. Once again, thank you all very much for joining us. And if you want to be a part of the discussion, because we had a pregame before we went into this and we're about to go into postgame, conversation doesn't end here, consider checking out the link in the description to become a Tier 2 member of our community. We got over 5,000 members in our community. We got a lot of other people that come in, show up every episode for a pregame, postgame. We do meetups, monthly meetups with Tina and myself. We're going to start doing a lot more in person. And so if you want to find out more about that, and it's a great way to support too what we do. So if you do like what we do and you want to see more of it, it's always nice to be able to keep the lights on. Check out that Tier 2 membership. Once again, thank you for joining us, and we'll see you next episode.